Today, ballet is most often a corporate art form, utilizing and employing a large number of skilled workers: dancers, choreographers, set and costume designers, stagehands, lighting technicians, sound technicians, musicians, and a conductor who coordinates it all. And behind the scenes, there are administrators, publicists, fundraisers, theater management staff, ballet mistresses and masters, rehearsal pianists, etc., etc. Within that list, the harpist might seem rather insignificant, but I'm here to tell you how important our predecessors have been. Yes, pedal harp makers and pedal harpists have been invaluable to the evolution of the grand art form of ballet. From a pleasurable entertainment for royalty to a profound statement of artistic expression. As you know, since ancient times in European civilization, harps provided music in a wide spectrum of situations: sacred and secular, peasant and elite, solo and in ensemble, in churches, in ballrooms, in salons, and on stages. In 1533, Catherine de' Medici married Henri Valois and brought her Italian flair in festival artistry to France. She sponsored complex revelries, in part as a political strategy to counteract the popularity of jousting, which was quite violent. Almost 50 years later, in 1581, she gave permission to her court musician, who was a violinist composer, to develop a special project of his. The result was a 5.5-hour production, which is considered to have been the birth of classical ballet. It was total theater, integrating scenery, costumes, special effects, dialogue, music, songs, and choreography, which was danced by noble amateurs with straight vertical torsos and outturned feet. But its most innovative attribute was that it had a single dramatic plot. This had never been done before. The title was Circe, or the Comic Ballet of the King. It chronicled the king's triumph over the witch Circe and his restoration of sanity and reason to his kingdom. The term comic signified it was a drama, not a mere review or entertainment like its predecessors. The musical score was in a style designed to accompany read poetry, because the text or story was spoken during the entire production. The musicians were divided into 10 groups, each group accompanying particular characters. The group composed of harps and flutes played for King Neptune and his court. The harps used were, of course, the diatonic ones available in 1581 and perfectly capable of producing the harmonies of the time. The following decades brought about political turmoil, economic depression, which resulted not in the extinction of ballet, but its simplification and downsizing. But the extravaganzas returned in the more prosperous mid-1660s with King Louis XIV's financial support and his personal dancing enthusiasm. Among the elite classes, ballroom dancing became a necessary and time-consuming social skill. In 1661, Louis XIV founded the French Royal Academy of Dance that provided standardized training. The Academy eventually produced professional dancers in professional productions that brought together prominent artists of the time, like the playwright Molière and the composer Lully. This progression was very significant. The audience became spectators, not participants as they had been before. During this evolution from amateurism to professionalism, from casual movement to controlled movement, the dancing area was transported from the ground level to a designated stage behind a proscenium arch, and individual dancers were recognized and given special attention and applause by the audiences. Eventually, the spoken texts were dropped, and dance, mime, and music alone were used to convey a story, with, of course, scenery and costumes. Costumes which also changed from the fashions of the day to historical costumes that added to the story's credibility and the dancer's expressiveness. And they introduced short skirts, which exposed the legs of the female dancers and encouraged technical virtuosity and artistic exhibitionism. Meanwhile, the harp became very fashionable at the salon gatherings of these same social and political circles: the aristocracy, the bourgeoisie, and the royalty. It was championed by such illustrious amateurs as Marie Antoinette, Josephine Bonaparte, and even the visiting Benjamin Franklin. The sound of the instrument was valued, but of equal importance was its ornate appearance and its ability to showcase the player's elegant posture, graceful and even seductive movements of the arms and hands, and since most harpists were women, her hairdo and her gown. This popularity created a demand for harp makers, harp teachers, and professional harpists to perform as soloists and in ensembles, all financially supported by the elite social classes. We are now leaving the 18th century, turning into the 19th century, and among the prominent harpists of that time were Krumpholz, Noderman, Sophia Dusick, and Botza. These harpists were like many of today's popular musicians because they usually played their own compositions and those of their contemporaries. And of course, just like today, all the composers were experimenting with new sounds, especially in the area of harmony. At that time, the new techniques involved modulation and chromaticism. Alas, the single-action harp of that time was unable to accommodate this new direction in music. Therefore, it was ignored or unenthusiastically accommodated by such composers as Couperin, Vivaldi, Telemann, the Bachs, Scarlatti, Mozart, Haydn, and Beethoven. Nevertheless, at the turn into the 19th century, harp makers were busy trying to invent and build harps that would satisfy the growing harmonic sophistication of the contemporary composers. As you know, this led to harps with multiple rows of strings, diagonally intersecting strings, and as many as 14 pedals. This was an amazing time in European musical history. Technological progress was being made then, similar to what we are witnessing now in our lifetimes. The focus now is on electronics, with synthesizers, computers, and complicated amplification. But then, around 200 years ago, the focus was on increasing tonal stability and increased range. Woodwinds received keys, brass instruments got valves, and pianos evolved from harpsichords. All this inventiveness was cyclical. Composers pushed instrument makers to develop the harmonic and tonal capabilities of their instruments. And instrument makers then had to motivate players to try and then to master the new instruments. And then the players had to write or inspire other composers to write for those instruments. In this climate of technological change and risk-taking, Sebastian Erard introduced his double-action pedal harp in 1810. It utilized the pedal, which was invented in Germany, the disc mechanism, which Erard developed in France, and it was manufactured mainly in England, so it was an international achievement. This new invention enabled harpists to play in all major and minor keys relatively safely and easily. Sebastian Erard was not only a brilliant inventor, but also a genius at marketing, manufacturing, and sales. Erard harps and pianos became household words and fashionable possessions among the wealthy in France and England. However, the new harp was more difficult to play than its predecessor, and so the harp was eventually replaced by the piano as the instrument of choice for upper-class amateur musicians. Nevertheless, harp music remained a favorite of imperial and wealthy audiences who continued to be a source of employment for harpists. In 1825, the double-action pedal harp was acknowledged as being within the family of high art or serious classical musical instruments by being offered for study at the Paris Conservatory, 30 years after the founding of that school. The first generation of double-action pedal harpists discovered, defined, and invented the vocabulary or language of this instrument. Until then, harp and keyboard styles were interchangeable, and most harpists played and taught piano as well as harp. a lot of the music was printed for harp or piano. But Erard's new harp allowed its players, composers, to explore and expose a wealth of new sounds like the glissando and new colors for, among other things, arpeggios. Elias Parrish Alvars is considered the father of modern harp playing. He had a brilliant career as an improvisational virtuoso harpist and as a composer who was respected by, worked with, and had creative exchanges with such luminaries as Liszt and Berlioz. Other famous harpists of that time were Godefroy, Haselmans, and John Thomas. So now let us return to the world of ballet. Equipped with a harp that is mechanically ready to be used by the ballet composers of the 19th century and with a distinctive new sound and character. One reason the harp became a featured instrument in ballet was because its legendary ethereal tone was perfect for two prominent aspects of ballet at that time. First, the ballets were vehicles for telling stories, and the fairy tale plots of such ballets as Giselle, Coppelia, Sylvia, and La Sylphide featured ethereal characters like willies and fairies and sylphs. Secondly, by the late 18th century, the ballerinas were dancing in point shoes on the tips of their toes, which made them appear to be airborne, to glide like heavenly spirits, to move effortlessly, and to poise ethereally. The prima, or star ballerinas, had become the focus of the ballet's choreographer and often the reason for many ballet plots. Therefore, their entrances had to be grand and graceful. The natural choice for musical accompaniment was the harp, and the musical form for those entrances was the cadenza. Classical stories, ballets, have a ritualized language. Visually, this is represented by pantomime gestures. For example, no is like that, go is like that, to love, to marry, to remember. And if you understand those gestures, you can easily follow the plot of a classical ballet. But if you don't, it's like being at a basketball game and not understanding the purpose of the hoop or the ball. The music for these ballets is also highly structured. For example, the pas de deux, or the duo dancers, have 4 parts. First, the male and female dance together. The second 2 are solo variations, one for the female, one for the male, and then they come together again in the 4th movement, which is usually called a coda. As I said, the harp cadenza usually accompanies a grand entrance of the star of the ballet, the female lead dancer, or in some cases, the male lead dancer. I will illustrate an example of the musical formula for a typical cadenza. It's from the Corsair by Drago. This one is for a male dancer. The conductor gives the downbeat. The opening chords signal the dancer's appearance on stage. The cascading arpeggios accompany him as he travels to the center of the stage. And on the final chord, which is indicated by the conductor, he takes the starting position for dancing the piece that follows. The ballet composers of this time were comparable to our TV or movie composers. Music was ordered by the measure after the choreography was set. For example, here were the musical directions given to Tchaikovsky for the end of Act 1 of Sleeping Beauty. Sleeping Beauty's name is Princess Aurora. The Princess Aurora has been given a bouquet of roses. Aurora notices an old woman who beats on her knitting needles a 2/4 measure. Gradually, she changes to a very melodious waltz in 3/4, but suddenly arrests. Aurora pricks her finger on a rose thorn, screams, pain, blood streams, give 8 bars in 4/4 wide. She begins to dance, dizziness, as if bitten by a tarantula. She keeps turning and then falls unexpectedly out of breath. This must last from 24 to 32 bars. At the end of this, there should be a tremolo of a few bars, as if cries of pain and sobs. Then the old woman throws off her disguise and reveals she is the wicked fairy who pronounced a curse on Aurora at the royal christening. For this moment, a chromatic scale must sound in the whole orchestra. As a result of such demands, the music tended to be efficient, predictable, often frothy, and largely forgettable. I like to think of these ballets as dessert, ice cream or candy or chocolate mints. And those musical scores were considered very flexible. Even established ballets were freely revised, reorchestrated, condensed, or expanded by other composers, conductors, or concertmasters to serve the whims of the choreographers or the solo dancers. The performers of the harp cadenzas followed this practice, too. By choice or by assignment, the harpists authored, elaborated on, improvised around, or rewrote their own cadenzas in their own distinctive styles. Besides, the celebrity entrances that the harp cadenzas accompanied were not really choreographed, but were gracefully mimed announcements to the audience that the dancer they had especially come to see was now on the stage before them. The harpist present at the grand climax of classical romantic ballet in Russia around the turn from the 19th to the 20th century was a harp virtuoso composer well suited to this tradition. Albert Heinrich Zabel, 1834 to 1910. He studied the double-action pedal harp in Berlin. In 1845, at the age of 11, he embarked on 3 years of orchestral tours throughout England, the United States, and Russia. At the age of 14, he was appointed solo harpist with the Berlin Opera. At the age of 19, he moved to St. Petersburg as one of thousands of skilled Europeans invited to settle in prosperous Russia. There, he became solo harpist to the Tsar, harpist with the St. Petersburg Symphony and the Imperial Russian Ballet, and later professor of harp at the St. Petersburg Conservatory of Music, where he is credited with founding the Russian School of Classical Harp Playing. He held those positions till his death in 1910 at the age of 75. This was a time in European musical history when composers became very familiar with the potentials and limitations of the classical musical instruments. This was the product of creative interaction between those composers and instrument players like Zabel. Zabel wrote a manual advising composers how to write idiomatically for the harp, and he worked closely with such fine orchestrators as Borodin, Mussorgsky, and Rimsky-Korsakov. In his harp method book, Zabel wrote, "Those who possess a harp must take into consideration its all-important poetic and silvery sound." To illustrate his harpistic poetry, I will play excerpts from a few of his compositions, all composed in the second half of the 19th century. This harp was in tune when I started. Don't know about now with the weather. This is something very basic, Dream of Love. A popular theme among harpist composers at the time was the spinning wheel. Another popular theme was water. This is Murmur of the Waterfall. And his most famous, these water and spinning wheel techniques might seem very overdone and hackneyed and a bit much to us late 20th century harpists, but these were new, very innovative at that time, and they influenced the composers of the time. Zabel's most famous piece, La Source, is also about water. And many sources say that as the composer and performer of ballet cadenzas, Zabel's musical inventiveness in the orchestra pit rivaled the dancer's virtuosic displays on stage. Ballettomanes often encouraged him with tumultuous ovations following his spectacular cadenzas. Zabel was the harpist for the premieres of the tradition-altering, still alive and revered ballets by Tchaikovsky, which we will examine in depth. Tchaikovsky was the first composer to introduce symphonic scores that evoked emotional depths and aesthetic ranges into the theatrical spectacle of ballet, which had hitherto bordered on burlesque and vaudeville. Through collaboration with choreographers Petipa and Ivanov, Tchaikovsky's music and respect for his music among audience and performers eventually revolutionized the art of ballet. But, as is most often the case, the audiences and performers who participated in this revolution were steeped in the old traditions, and to them the change was neither obvious, readily accepted, or even desirable. In fact, Tchaikovsky's first ballet, Swan Lake, was performed in 1877 and was an absolute flop. It lay buried for 17 years, but more about that later. The orchestra parts that ballet harpists receive are of Tchaikovsky's original cadenzas and harp parts. Some sections are impossible because of too many notes in too many different directions at too fast a tempo. Arrangements or additions of those sections have been passed down student to teacher or among harpist friends, and some have been published and can easily be purchased. Now, as I said earlier, Zabel was steeped in the tradition of arranging or composing his own harp cadenzas, thank you, as well as being requested by dancers to write special solo variations for them. Legend has it that the dancers and choreographers preferred Zabel's cadenzas to Tchaikovsky's, and so Zabel's cadenzas were used at the Imperial Russian Ballet, which was renamed the Kirov Ballet in 1935 under the influence of Joseph Stalin. Zabel's cadenzas have been passed down through his students and successors and are still performed by the Kirov and requested by many Russian ballet soloists when they appear as guests with other ballet companies. We'll begin with the cadenza from Waltz of the Flowers in the Nutcracker Ballet. First, the original, as notated by Tchaikovsky, except for the ascending arpeggio at the end, which is scored off the harp. So I've shortened that one. Notice his use of the arpeggio technique that was conventional at the time and that we heard in some of his other compositions. Thank you, Zabel. There should be. Salcedo maintains the contrary motion, one hand after the other. Etc., which is a totally different texture. Grandjani uses both directions. Glissandi for certain arpeggios. For example, in the ascending arpeggio, to put it in the descending arpeggio. And many harpists decorate the final chords with arpeggios. It's the end of Grand Janis. All of these are wonderful for the concert stage, but I strongly recommend that you never play them for ballet performance unless you first check it out with the choreographer and the conductor. Otherwise, the dancers will understandably be very confused and bump into each other. And you do not want to be responsible for injuries. That is a no-no. In the mid-1980s, when I first started playing the Nutcracker, the Boston Ballet had a small orchestra pit, and the harp was outside so I could see the dancing. Therefore, I knew that this cadenza accompanied a traditionally mimed section by the Sugar Plum Fairy before the dancing flowers came on stage. Then about 4 years ago, I happened to be at a piano rehearsal where they did the cadenza. To my amazement, it was danced by the entire corps, that is 15 to 20 dancing flowers. A change that literally took place behind my back because the pit had been changed in the meantime. It had been expanded and broadened, and the harp was set inside with the stage behind me and above me. So I'm locked into this cadenza. But fortunately, they did follow my interpretation, so I can't complain too much. Now, you might have thought that I'm playing some of these cadenzas rather slow. Another harpist has said that there are two tempi in ballet, too fast and too slow. But there is an explanation for this. Dancers dance fast to show off brilliant technical virtuosity, and they dance slow to show off amazing, breathtaking technical control. Therefore, the best of them are able and eager to dance where appropriate, as slow or as fast as possible. Now, everybody knows the challenge of playing fast, but there is a huge challenge to playing slow, especially cadenzas, which are just dominant seventh chords. They have to make sense, and they have to sound musical. When you play fast, the phrasing is rather automatic often. But when you play slow, you really have to calculate and feel and emphasize the phrasing and what goes on between the notes. I'd like to mention two other musical observations about ballet. Ballet technique consists of many different poses, and each dancer looks pretty much the same when he or she strikes a pose. You know, you're familiar with the different things that they do. But the unique character of each dancer is revealed in how he or she moves from one pose to another. They can be abrupt, or they can be very gentle, and that defines his or her uniqueness. An analogy with music could be to equate the poses with dynamic contrasts, extremes of tempos, or the beginnings and endings of phrases. Also, musicians count by the bar lines. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Dancers count holistically. They count the phrase 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Actually, our way of counting in comparison seems very mathematical, and theirs seems very musical. But it is disconcerting to hear them up on stage when you're in a waltz of 3/4 and they're going 7, 8, 9. What's going on? But that's why they do it. The Nutcracker was Tchaikovsky's last ballet, composed 2 years before his death at the age of 53. At the age of 37, his first ballet, Swan Lake, was commissioned by the Russian Imperial Theaters. The premiere of Swan Lake in 1877 failed largely because the choreographer and the dancers pronounced Tchaikovsky's advanced musical score undanceable. 17 years later, in a memorial concert after his death, the second act of Swan Lake was presented, newly choreographed and newly appreciated after the successes of his Sleeping Beauty and Nutcracker ballets. This production was very well received and led to an entirely new full-length production that has become the definitive classical ballet, with its universal themes of good and evil, truth and deception, love and betrayal, and the coming of age. The longest and most significant harp cadenza in Swan Lake occurs in Act 2, when the lovers come together before their dramatic and virtuosic adagio duo that begins with a solo harp and violin. Maybe you're familiar with it. This one. Does that sound familiar? Okay. This is Tchaikovsky's original cadenza. Please notice he uses the downward cascading arpeggios that were conventional at the time and that Zabel used in Zabel's version of the Nutcracker. Often the ascending chords are eliminated, and this does cut out a lot of the entrance mime or walking around time, which today's audience often finds very boring. Now here's the Swan Lake cadenza that Zabel wrote, and it's still played by the Kirov and requested by their soloists when they travel. Naturally, it emerges from the obligatory arpeggios. Now we turn to Tchaikovsky's first successful ballet, Sleeping Beauty. The acceptance of this ballet was the catalyst that changed the direction of ballet as an art form. This cadenza is mimed by Princess Aurora before her passionate and virtuosic solo dance called the Rose Adagio, in which she accepts a single rose from each of the 4 men who are competing for her hand in marriage. First is Tchaikovsky's original. Who was a student of Zabel's. Boston Ballet performed Sleeping Beauty for 3 weeks last October, and in facing the prospect of playing the cadenza that many times, I made several decisions that were influenced by the information I'm relating to you. First, the Sleeping Beauty Harp Cadenza is Tchaikovsky's weakest one. Second, I profoundly respect the genius of Tchaikovsky and the desirability of playing a harp cadenza that is stylistically consistent with his score. Third, even though some of his harp passages are impossible, in general he had a firm grasp how to compose idiomatically for the harp and had an extensive palette of sounds that he used on the harp. Therefore, I decided to boldly express my belief that Tchaikovsky knew exactly what effect he wanted when he scored the right and left hands in simultaneous contrary motion, but handle it with the attitude traditional to the ballet harpists of his time. I was inspired by Tchaikovsky's treatment of the Waltz of the Flowers, where he uses melodic material from the Waltz of the Flowers score. And here are two sections from the Rose Adagio that follows Sleeping Beauty. The violins come. And at the end, you'll recognize the influence of Zabel and Kuhn. In retrospect, it was a bit long, and I'm glad they didn't have me do it. But I made a lecture demonstration tape with 3 cadenzas, mine, Tchaikovsky's, and Kuhn's, and I gave it to Arthur Leith, whose positions at the Boston Ballet have been dancer, ballet master, music librarian. He also owns a pedal harp and is a member of the American Harp Society. He gave my tape to the ballet mistress who was staging the production, and she relayed to me through the rehearsal pianist that she liked parts of each cadenza. And she decided she wanted to choreograph the cadenza rather than have it mimed. The conductor has told me that this was quite unusual because in ballet, history is everything. So, for the opening arpeggios, she requested 4 plunk plunks, meaning plunk, plunk. She wanted a series of 4 of them so that each of the 4 suitors to Princess Aurora could have an elegant solo bow, meaning slow. Then Aurora would cross the stage during the dreamy cascades, and she preferred the Kirov swooshy cascades, her term again, instead of she wanted swooshy. So, performance practice won out over historical correctness. She liked my melodic idea for the cascades, but preferred the shorter length of time in the Tchaikovsky version, and my final 6 chords were okay. So I recomposed my version, which was Xerox, distributed to all the rehearsal pianists, and inserted into the conductor's score and the company's harp part. This is the final version. Picture 4 dashing cavaliers, dressed elegantly in plumed hats, satin waistcoats decorated with jewels and beads, and of course revealing tights that show off and accent all of their masculine muscles. As a suitor competing for the favor of Princess Aurora, each man wants to make a dramatic and lasting impression on the princess, her parents, and the court in general. Who am I to rush these displays of exhibitionism? So, this is the scenario. One after the other, the 4 suitors bow, each trying to outdo the previous one. After acknowledging the bows, Princess Aurora floats effortlessly around the stage and then gracefully and grandly assumes her position to begin the adagio when the woodwinds join the harp. Tchaikovsky's scores marked a turning point in ballet history, making the music a partner to the choreography and pushing the art form itself beyond a decorative, delightful entertainment into a medium of intense, dramatic feeling and serious artistic content. Ever since Tchaikovsky, the purpose and the direction of ballet have been for the movement and the music to serve the story or the genius of the choreographer, discouraging any occasions for blatant, obvious, individual, independent exhibitionism by dancers or musicians. And the harp cadenzas of that era and before have been handed down to us as set, composed, imposed. From the early 1900s, artistic director Serge Diaghilev dominated Russian ballet, establishing Russia as the leader and the standard for ballet and evolving the art form beyond the conventional gestures and plots. He staged productions in which the prima ballerina's prominence was diminished. And his composers, such as Prokofiev and Stravinsky, wrote orchestral scores in which the harp blends into the orchestral colors. For both the dancer and the harpist, these parts may be less prominent, but are still technically and musically challenging, as anyone knows who has played such ballets as Romeo and Juliet, Cinderella, The Firebird, Petrushka, etc. During the first half of this 20th century, Russian ballet companies toured extensively throughout Europe and the United States. In the United States, their grandeur and glamour created an audience for ballet, and the result was that many regional companies were started, for example, in New York City, San Francisco, in Boston. With this geographical and cultural expansion of the appreciation and the practice of ballet, choreographers have used the art form to express the public and personal feelings, opinions, and dilemmas of their own times and places. They have explored and exploited the possibilities of controlled physical movement, which is a technical definition of ballet. Extreme and/or personal expressions have resulted in extreme and/or personal choreography and music. This has resulted in the stretching of dance's storytelling ability by such marvelous choreographers as John Cranko of Canada or USA's Agnes DeMille. But it has also resulted in the abstract visualization of music, a movement led by, if not defined by, the late George Balanchine of the New York City Ballet. Other proponents were Isadora Duncan, Martha Graham, etc. George Balanchine is often quoted as defining ballet by saying, "Ballet is when you see the music and hear the dance." This direction has led to an exploration of relationships between and among human bodies and in movement landscapes or group patterns that are entirely visual, not at all mental or derived from what we call the real world. And today, most choreographers are interested in presenting works that cover a large spectrum of human emotions, from quiet and romantic with seemingly effortless movements, like in classical ballet, to intense and exciting with off-balance positions and quick shifts of weight and movements that are full of obvious effort and hard work. As in all art forms today, the creators represent a wide spectrum of inspirations and agendas. Some choreographers use their work to express the complex harshness and confusion of modern life. Others try to provide relief from modern life. Others use the music, movements, and fads of modern life to express themselves through dance. But the beauty of great art is that it lives through the ages. And therefore, with each recreation of a Minkus, Drygo, or Tchaikovsky ballet, the harpist is called upon to play the role of a virtuoso soloist, as the rest of the orchestra stops playing and the prima ballerina enters on stage, as in Don Quixote. And then she walks to the middle of the stage. For her solo variation. One of the hardest things in putting together a lecture concert like this is deciding what to omit. So I've touched on a lot of topics I hope some of you will be inspired to pursue and develop on your own, either written or oral, such as this is. But if you have any questions, I will try to answer them. Yes?
I'm always wondering why he did not use harp in the symphonies and did in his ballet.
Probably because most of them were commissioned, and symphonies at that time might not have had a regular harpist. That's my guess. Ballets always had harpists, and operas, it's in Eugene Onegin, his opera, so naturally he composed for it there. That's my guess. There's one over here, yes?
Are there any contemporary, very, very contemporary composers writing cadenzas for harp?
No. Most of the time they leave the harp out. We performed a piece just this last season, which was taken from Tchaikovsky's piano works and string quartets, etc. And it was orchestrated much like a Prokofiev score, and they used a lot of harp in that. There were no cadenzas, but I don't think there's a place for a cadenza in a modern ballet. Just speaking in general, I mean, any choreographer can do anything he wants. Yes?
Chu Sang-ho, the great choreographer, did in harp concerto, which is, that ballet is called Birds of Paradise, and that's done quite frequently by Boston Ballet, which commissioned it. I don't know if it's done by other companies.
I don't know if Kranko's is. I know of another choreographer who did that also. Can't remember his name, but Ravel Introduction Allegro has been done.
Yes.
Debussy dances. I'm working now with some of the choreographers in the Boston Ballet, and they're doing chamber works with chamber ballet and chamber music, and we did the Debussy Trio Sonata, and it was a story of Narcissus, and we all had to dress as if we were models for Victoria's Secrets. even the musicians had to. So it was amusing, but the choreographers are getting very interesting and interested in all kinds of music now. Yes.
I might mention that in Pittsburgh, we have a resident composer, and he is working with choreographers and writing very nice pieces.
Oh, really? What's his name?
Michael Moritz.
Ritz?
Moritz.
Moritz, M-O-R-I-T-Z?
ICC.
Keep our ears open for that name. Thank you.
And very playable.
Very playable.
And we work.
You've been working with him? Oh, good. We are grateful to you. Thank you. There was, yes?
I just wonder, why is the harp always put at the back in the orchestra?
Largely because of sight lines. It's so hard to see around and over. I prefer to be at the very back because the percussion players are always saying, can you move 2 inches this way or 2 inches that way? And if no one's behind me, don't have to worry about it. It depends on the depth of the pit, too, whether or not the harp sticks up above. But it's, I don't know, I've heard complaints about it because it takes up a lot of space, but the bass players are standing there and they're moving all the time, whereas the harp is just a general form. That's why I think they do it. Yes, there was someone over here. Any other questions? Yes.
It'd be really tantalizing with all the music you play, but you just talk of the moment of truth almost. And I wonder if you wouldn't mind finish up pushing out because something like that. What happens afterwards given the pieces? With one of them, I don't see you.
What happens after them? The orchestra comes in. Well, I played a little of Swan Lake, yes, thank you. No, was it Swan Lake or Sleeping Beauty? Where the strings come in. There are lots of excellent recordings. I haven't reduced those. That's what the rehearsal pianists do. They reduce these scores to play them on the piano. Anyone else? Yes.
Is there a publication that shows the concerto side by side?
I don't know if years ago I got a publication from Don Henry of Nutcracker Cadenzas, and they actually had Salvo's cadenzas in there, plus one by Bozza, which is added to Swan Lake also. And I think there are several editions of Tchaikovsky ballets. Probably the Nutcracker is the most frequently published one, and you can get them through Vanderbilt Line and Healy, etc., etc. As far as the impossible parts go, though, I encourage you to try to do it yourself. I have been playing with the Boston Ballet for several years, and every year we have at least 50 Nutcracker productions. So I amuse myself by often rewriting certain sections. And as long as you keep the melody, the harmony, and the rhythm, and don't take up too much time, you stay within the bar lines, you can do something that's Tchaikovsky-like, and you don't have to rely on those that are published, although those that are published are, I'm sure, excellent. Yes?
What do you suggest doing for auditions when you do get one of these sections that is virtually unplayable and
Right.
And maybe you've been doing something yourself somewhere else.
Right.
And never had any comments from the conductor or the choreographer or dancer.
Well, I've heard different schools of thought from adjudicators on that. One is that you try to play what they sent you, but another is to say that you've performed this before professionally, and this was the part that you used. And maybe they will be impressed that you have experience. Anyone else? Well, thank you all for coming.